Good morning or good evening if you're in Asia, or maybe even good afternoon if you are in Europe. My name is Ashok Panikkar, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Metaculture Studio. Starting in 2008 and pretty much full time from 2013 to 2014, as the liberal world order started visibly deteriorating, I found myself trying to alert people to what I saw as the real and present dangers to civilization. As you can see from the current state of countries like India, the rise of authoritarian China, the economic and military weakening of the West, and the collapsing of social systems across the world, I may have been understating the urgency. Just for the record, without liberal democracies, ideas like peace, equality, and justice would be irrelevant. For that matter, without liberal democracy, you can give up on protesting the government's actions, reading your favorite author, or even talking candidly amongst friends. Those lovely folks in China, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and our homegrown despots will tell us what is permissible. Since 2017, from my home office in Washington, D.C., I've been trying to educate people about our existential and civilizational crisis. You can find out more about our courses and activities from the link on the chat. Metaculture Studio Conversations are an attempt to go back to the basic foundation that underpins all social activities, and I would say civilization itself, the warm and intelligent conversation. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of arguments, opinions, and angry people trying to beat upon each other. Here, we are not trying to persuade or even excite. Here, we are trying to model what gentle and meaningful conversations might look like. We might disagree with each other, but we will do so being curious about how the other person could think like that, and we will inquire to learn more. Each segment, I invite someone very special, not because he is a famous writer or she is a brilliant scientist. My guests are here because they are sincere thinkers and good conversationists whose company I enjoy. Welcome to my dear friend and colleague, Pilar. I think you're muted, Pilar.
Hello, Ashok and everybody.
Excellent,
Good to
excellent
be
to see
here.
you. Yeah. So, Pilar, I decided I wouldn't introduce you and I would let you introduce yourself in a couple of minutes. Tell us who the hell is Pilar?
Thank you, Ashok, for having me here. It's really great to get the chance to talk to you and dig deep into some of the important ideas. I am Ecuadorian. I was born and raised in Quito, Ecuador. I'm based in Kansas right now. I am a cultural anthropologist. I have worked and lived in several countries. I have a home in Cuba, and I also am a filmmaker. So for the most of my life I was in school. And I was, I finished my PhD at the University of Illinois. I've conducted a lot of different types of research, mostly in the social sciences. Um, and in the latest part of my career, I've looked at food. And so I've made films about food, especially traditional foods. I'm interested in really learning from older people about traditional ways of cooking, about their knowledge about medicine. And I've embarked in this project called Comidas que Curan, which is basically researching about food and culture, and then putting it into film or other media that is accessible for a lot of people. So that's what I've been doing in the latest part of my career. And I've also, engaged with you in your metaculture courses. That's where this all started. I think maybe a few years before, when we met in Massachusetts. And I'm also a mediator, so that you actually inspired my interest in conflict mediation, and I've done some work there as well. So I'm happy to be here today and talk to you.
Welcome, welcome. And I think there are so many levels at which the kind of work you do and your passions intersect with mine, other than culture itself, which is a huge, uh, extremely contentious issue or area right now. Then, of course, food. I remember you and I, we're both foodies. And
Yes.
even though I'm a vegetarian, we have tried swapping recipes and
Recipe.
stuff like that. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I love cooking, and but like I said, there are so many things that we connect on. One of the things that inspired me to invite you is that of all the people who have taken my courses, I want to say that you're one of a handful who has a PhD, a good PhD from a good university, and you're still open to learning. You know, I've been an employer for about 25 to 26 years. And in my last 12-year stint in India with Metaculture, I hired so many people from the West and young, really bright Indians from elite institutions. One of the things that I really struggled with was the extraordinary difficulties they had. I'm talking of people in their early 20s to early 30s. The extraordinary challenges they faced in learning anything that clashed with their current understanding. This could be in terms of technique, this could be in terms of work ethic, this could be in terms of even and actually philosophy or the approach that they take to work. And most of my time as a manager of metaculture in India went in trying so hard to get them to think differently. Now, coming back to I mean to Demo Sapien courses, and you've been a participant in a few of them. I am astounded at your capacity to ask yourself very difficult questions, even about things that you thought were settled. You kind of had a very strong opinion on. And here I'm not necessarily talking of emotional issues and about your personal life or triggers. I'm talking of conceptual ideas that you thought were settled, political ideas, and you seemed open to it. Long way of saying, I'm so glad to have this conversation about what it is that prevents people from learning.
Mm-hmm.
Because evidently, education is one of the biggest industries. And at the same time, for anyone who's genuinely interested in bringing about shifts in thinking, it's almost impossible to create that. So, you've spent time in academia also. So, let me ask you, what has your experience been about genuine learning and the difficulties that you have encountered with your students or other people in terms of their being open to new learning?
I think one thing that comes to mind right now is the language. So, excuse me, academics in general. I mean, my experience. I'm gonna talk from my experience. Um, Academics make everything that is common sense very complicated, very sophisticated. They use very sophisticated language to talk about basic stuff that we live every day through and that we see every day. And that is it's just common understanding for people, for lay people. But they you know they and we develop concepts, because I also was part of it for a long time, and make them unintelligible.
Mm.
So I think that's part of the problem, that um, when you develop this language for things that that are part of reality, are surrounding reality, and then you make them very complicated, then that gets in the way of learning. I mean,
Right. Tell me a
that gets
little
in the way
more.
of understanding reality. Yeah.
Tell me a little more. How does that specifically get in the way of learning? I understand this elite, and not even elite, specialized language. But how
Mhm.
does that come in the way of learning?
Yeah, I'm gonna refer to one of our previous conversations, and you mentioned this concept of packaging. So it's about really creating a package for an idea, and then this package has a label, and this label is a concept that is very sophisticated, and that you have to go to grad school to learn about it, and so you have to, you have to go through this process of, it's a very selective process. Where only the smartest people get into grad school, and then they're surrounded by these super smart people, other students are, and professors that are even smarter, that and then they all know how to read this concept and speak this language. So and basically know what's inside the package.
Mm,
So once you're inside, you have to learn this language. You need to understand, to learn these labels in order to know what's inside. So that makes it very difficult to, for other people to access it. It makes the learning more difficult
right.
instead of making it more easy.
Hearing you speak reminds me about priests and Brahmins and people who had access to the scriptures, which the
Mhm.
ordinary people didn't have because those scriptures were written in Latin or Sanskrit or some Aramaic or something like that. And once the priests got into that inner circle of people who understood that language, understood the intricacies and the nuances, they didn't have the capacity to translate that into everyday language, not only for people around them, they didn't even have the capacity to translate it into their own minds. So, for when I speak with many academics, for instance, or activists who use academic language, they use these language, the vocabulary, as shortcuts for hugely complex ideas. And but they have bought into those vocabularies so
Mhm.
much that they've lost any idea of what lies under that. So,
Mhm.
yes, this idea of packaging of ideas, packaging of concepts, and not being able to go past the wrapping is
Mhm.
definitely something. I know that,
Yeah.
you told me that you had questions for me, but I do have one more question for you before you ask me any questions.
Yes.
One of the things I try to do is not just here, but even in the work I do, I try to constantly link the theories and the intellectual content of what we are talking about to personal experiences,
Mm.
not because I wanted this to sound like a talk show, or this is not supposed to even remotely remind anyone of Oprah's stuff. But I mean, I'm dismissive of that. But really, because the way we are and the ways in which we understand ideas and the way we behave in the world has a lot to do with how we have internalized and absorbed these ideas throughout our life. So,
Mm.
can you go back, if you can, to the earliest time in your life? It could be childhood, it could be in college, whatever, when you were really struck by the fact that you were struggling to learn an idea. I'm not talking of learning math. I'm not talking
Mm.
of learning a computer program, nothing technical, but an idea that your body and your mind refused to allow you to grapple with an idea because it seemed so completely ridiculous or out there.
I have two examples maybe in mind. One of them is I think your question touches on unlearning. For me, is the most difficult ideas to, like you said, to really grapple with are the ones that I'm already settled on. So I have to I have to thank my therapist here, because she really helped me through this process, and she really it was a way for me to confront with my these very, very established beliefs. And one of them is about my experience as a woman. So this is one of the areas where one of the first things that I work with her about. And um, understanding myself as part of this group, in a way homogeneous group of women who experience the same kind of situations all the time. So for example, one of them is being interrupted, like being interrupted by men and older men. And so every time I touched on something, and I told her, well, this is because I'm a woman, this is why I'm being treated this way. And she asked me to talk about myself. She said, okay, tell me what happened to you in this situation. And instead of speaking, for the broader group of women, that this is what happens to everybody, she really taught me, and we really worked on it every session to really speak from my own experience. Because even though we are all women, we don't experience the world in the same way. So this was difficult to do for me, because I had been doing, a lot of my research had to do with gender relations and with women's health and the inequalities, gender inequalities in many different areas. So I struggled because I had to let go of that. In order to talk about my experience, I had to let go of what I had researched and what I knew was true, because of the research, because of the science that was behind it, and understand that my experience is unique and that I cannot speak for everybody.
This is so fascinating. Hearing you talk about gender, I'm reminded that, or rather, what comes to my mind is the way race has also become very similarly political.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a brown person or a black person, you are required today to think and believe in certain things. And if you don't, you are immediately targeted and called anything from Uncle Tom to a white assimilated person or whatever, because the idea that you can be a black conservative or an immigrant who votes for the Republican Party in the U.S. It just rattles many people, because that's not what the research and
Mm-hmm.
the academic thinking on the subject
Mm-hmm.
tells people. Good, thank you for sharing that. Yes, go
So
on.
I have a question for you related to that. So um, what life experience showed you the meaning of unlearning? What was this experience like, and what does unlearning mean to you?
Okay, so I'm wondering where to actually tackle this question from. Like most children growing up, I just blindly accepted what was around me, not just what was told to me, but what I saw around me. One of the defining factors in my learning experience was that I was sent to boarding school at the age of 6. And then I lived with my grandparents for another year. So basically, to put it kind of simply, throughout my entire schooling of 12 to 13 years, I stayed at home for only 4 years or 5 years. The rest of the time I was away. And I also moved cities quite a lot. Now, what this meant was, while I am from a certain kind of family, from a certain part of India, from a certain kind of social and cultural class, I could never carry. the lessons from that environment throughout my life. Because every time, literally every year and a half, I was in a new city with a different language and with completely different peer group, without my family support. And I had to rethink and relearn everything because survival itself required that I adapt. I couldn't continue to be my parents' child with all the values that they put in when I'm in boarding school in Bangalore and I'm being bullied by much bigger kids. You see, so unlearning meant, in the earliest, crudest way, a way to survive in completely new conditions. Now, that wasn't because of my interest in unlearning. It wasn't because I was a wonderful learner. It's because I just had to survive in a
Yes.
new situation. But I'll give a example of what unlearning meant for me uh, personally and where it was conscious. When I came to the US in 95, I came from an Indian environment where homosexuality was absolutely taboo. Now, I did come from a design school and art kind of an environment. So it was rumored that some people might have been gay, but, and one didn't really bully those who might have been gay, but there was at best a very muted, uncomfortable tolerance of gay people. And that too, only in the design school. Outside, it was absolutely dangerous for anyone to come out. And as a result, and I'm being completely candid, as a result, I carried with me enormous discomfort and enormous prejudices, not even bias, prejudices about homosexuality. I come to Boston, which is one of the most liberal places in the US in 95, and I find that there are colleagues and classmates and friends who are gay or bisexual. And the defining friendship that I had on this topic was with a young man called Fred, who was in my graduate program in Boston. And he was openly gay, and to the extent that he even manifested some of the mannerisms or behaviors that one would stereotypically say was gay. And intellectually, we connected because both of us were very interested in the political and philosophic aspects of what were being taught. We shared one class together. And this made us connect, and we became friends. And I'm the kind of person who I don't shy away from talking about tough stuff. So one day I just asked him, "Hey, Fred," I said, "you're the first gay friend I have, and can I be very honest with you?" And he said, "Of course." I said, "Fred, I like you, but I'm terribly uncomfortable with homosexuality." And he was so mature. And I'll give you another anecdote with Fred, which totally bust my understanding of homosexuality. This must have been in 97 or something like that. We were walking past a bar which had they were advertising a gay evening. And so I look at Fred and say, "Are you going for it?" He said, "Yeah, but I mean, no, but sometimes I do." So at one point I said, he asked me, "Have you seen any gay films?" I said, "Fred, when I see two men making love on the screen, it creeps me out." He laughed. He said, "You know what? I get creeped out when I watch heterosexual lovemaking." And he didn't even remotely feel offended. And it it forced me to rethink my prejudices. And since then, of course, I mean, when you lived as long a life as I have, and when you have challenged and had to challenge so many things that are happening around the world, you don't have a choice. If you don't unlearn, there's nothing else left in you. So, I mean,
Yeah.
does that work as an example for you?
Yes, and it reminds me of an example I would like to talk about in this regard, because we are talking about unlearning prejudices. So I think the other example I had in mind I wanted to tell you is when we met in Massachusetts. We were hosted in a mansion owned by two young libertarians. And that was my first ever, like in your case, your first ever encounter with a gay man. This was my first ever encounter with a conservative libertarian,
Right.
from the US, white American. And I had read so much about this particular group of people during my graduate studies, and I had, and this is what were the very difficult unlearning, because I think the most difficult unlearning is is the stuff that you have believed in for so long,
Absolutely.
and you've been in that kind of like movie, watching a movie with these beliefs,
Right.
and these characters that are all fictional. And this is how I felt about them, because first time ever, I had all these ideas about them very settled. And yeah, I found out the first thing that they own guns, and my first thought is, oh my God, I'm in danger and I need to get out of here. And I was actually, I actually felt scared. And I told our friend Alejandra, like, let's, I think we should go because I think, I know these people are racist. That's my first thing that came to my mind. And I felt threatened. And of course, after a day or so of spending time with them, and after actually having that shocking kind of like difficult passage through, going through he invited me to see his guns, and I was terrified. And after a while of talking to him, he was just a guy, he was just a guy. He loved talking to people, and we became the best friends. And it was a really transformative moment for
Right.
me. It was a moment where I realized how much of these fictional stories
Right.
I had in my mind that were made up of prejudices, and yet
Right.
I teach about prejudice. I this is what I do as an anthropology teacher, and here I am holding all of these prejudices and living under this um, farce, because I really never, I really don't know
Right.
beyond these ideas, beyond these books, beyond this package.
Right. So this is great. I'm sure if we had more time, both of us could come up with more examples like this. I want to touch on something, Pilar. Uh, you mentioned about holding on to these ideas coming from research and science in academia. And I want to just suggest it's not science. It's research, yes, but a lot of the research today in academia is politically motivated. Before people start inquiring into a subject, they have already settled on a political end game. They've already decided that, for instance, X is racist and therefore X is bad. And wherever they spot that behavior or that language X, they do not dig deeper into it. So when people go through school, when today it's true even in middle school and high school, but definitely in the liberal university system, we come out of it with very, very deeply etched dogmas. And we presume it to be science because we have social scientists who have been doing this work or who have written those papers. I would seriously question the use of the word science to describe this work, because science essentially requires enormous open mindedness. It requires the capacity to inquire into the fundamentals, the root issues, and it needs to be falsified and verified over and over again. There is no question of science becoming a dogma if it's good science. So this, when we talk, coming back to our topic for the day, one of the main reasons for me, one of the main reasons that education and formal education comes in the way of learning is because we seem to have fallen into the trap of equating education with propaganda, or creating a certain kind of human being with the right kind of ideas. So today, nobody would question that the importance of education is to create non-racist, non-sexist people. I, I would even question that kind of a premise. Education has to be primarily about learning about the world, learning about reality, learning about complexity. And we must be able to hope that good inquiry, good learning would result in people being less racist, less sexist, or whatever else we want. The,
Mm.
the, the moment we start with an agenda of trying to make people X, we are basically propagating a dogma.
Mm.
We are not in the business of learning anymore, but of almost human engineering. So I'm just going to stop there.
Mm.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I want to respond to what you were mentioning earlier about science and the thoughts that were going through my head, because this is something that, many hours are spent discussing and reading about, objectivity and subjectivity, and how our subjective experiences and biases inform our knowledge making in, in research, and in anything we do, but especially when we are conducting research, and trying to learn and trying to understand the world. What comes to mind, Ashok, is when you question this use of science, of the word science. um, i I see what you're saying, in that objectivity is important, and in a lot of the discussions in the liberal arts side of the campus today, um, it's we tended to dismiss objectivity,
Right.
and I think there's value in objectivity, and there are some critiques, but I don't think they have been amplified as much, in the sense that we value too much nowadays in academia the subjective, and the subjectivity, and and objectivity is seen as questionable, almost,
Right.
uh, because it doesn't acknowledge the bias, and I think that's where it's coming from. But at
Right.
the same time, forgetting the importance of objectivity means that we are not going to be, I mean, we are the truth is important.
I hear
Truth
you.
is important for the people that we are trying to advocate for. I mean, there's a lot of advocacy going on in liberal arts campuses for for people that have been oppressed, historically oppressed, and that are experiencing injustice today. But we are hurting those people if we are not engaging in science as you describe it, as we really need to try to falsify this, in the sense that we need to uh, we need to really try to get close to the truth, because it's going to benefit if we are trying to protect victims
Right.
of unfair crimes. This is what is going to uh, get them protected, and not this extreme preoccupation for subjectivity. So I hear your critique there. And in terms of what I heard you say about the educational process nowadays, and what kind of subjects it attempts to produce. um, I think there's a lack of acknowledgement in the bias itself.
Mm.
So, and I think people have forgotten to really teach about critical thinking. And I
Oh,
think
don't even go there.
and yeah, and I want to say that because, especially this past year, we have seen how important critical thinking skills are, and how unequipped people that went through college and that have went through these, liberal arts and other programs in universities that have supposed to equip them with these tools, they completely fail.
Right.
And they have
Absolutely.
completely failed because the focus is not on the critical thinking itself, which actually gives you the tools, like you said, to understand, but for themselves, but rather, college is a place where you go to be sometimes admonished, sometimes canceled, sometimes called out.
Right.
And this is, I think it's very, I don't abide by these techniques for
Right.
teaching, because they're rooted in shame.
Mm.
And I don't think shame is a good way to teach anybody anything, and
Beautifully said.
to teach them to think for themselves.
Right.
Shame is completely counterproductive.
Right.
So I think, going back to critical thinking in the sense of teacher acknowledging their own biases and their own political, agendas is not, is okay to have an agenda. Everybody has an agenda.
Right.
Everybody has opinions. Everybody is participating in a, in a fight of some sort. In a cause. But then, if you take away space for critical thinking, and instead you tell the students what is right and what's wrong,
Right.
they're not gonna ever learn for themselves, and even less if you're using shame.
Thank you. I think you put it very, very well. Like there's just so much you and I can talk about, and I'm conscious of time. And so I want to make a minor transition to the second part of our title, which is
Mm,
how does lived experience prevent learning? I mean, this seems almost counter intuitive too, because you learn through experience. You immerse yourself in reality, in real life, and you come out of it with robust understanding. Now, this is very linked with the earlier topic of subjectivity. The
mm,
personal experience is something that is much wanted today, BAUNTED, and uh, that has been, uh, in a sense, valorized or put on a pedestal over that of objective clinical understanding or scientific understanding. In other words, if I have experienced this, then it must be true because, after all, I've
mm,
experienced it. We
mm,
do make allowances for the fact that you may experience things differently. We do make allowances for that. But here's my problem. Given that I have been teaching critical thinking and creativity and stuff like that since 1988, one of the things I've learned is that we don't necessarily learn the right lesson from our experiences. In other words, and I remember, I mean, this may make no sense to American viewers at all, but there was this fantastic cricket player, batsman, Gaurav Vishwanath. Gundappa Vishwanath. Sorry, Gundappa Vishwanath. We used to call him Vishy. This was in the early 70s. And he was extraordinary stroke maker, delight to watch. The problem was there was a certain kind of ball that always got him out. And I remember, and I must have been only about 13 or 14 at that point in time, but I remember because I really followed the game. I remember a cricket critic and journalist saying,
mm,
for some great players, experience is a poor teacher. And it stuck with me because
mm,
he kept getting out to the same kind of ball all the time. How could he not learn? And then, my days as a teacher of thinking, I realized that just because I go through a experience, it doesn't mean I have the capacity to reflect upon that experience. If and By and large, one could probably say that if my experiment with that situation or my experience is a positive one, then I'm almost certain never to learn from it, because I come out of it thinking, I did it, it worked. Why do I need to question what worked? Now, if on the other hand, this we would presume that if we had a bad experience, we'd have to reflect back to make sure that the next time around we didn't make the same mistakes.
Mm.
So the chances of learning are higher when we have failed than when we have succeeded. However, here's another problem. Very often when we fail, we are so traumatized by the failure that we are unable to switch on our neocortex and our analytical thinking. And we are unable, because of the trauma, to get enough distance to see what is happening. So, I guess the point for me, which is really powerful, is that lived experience very often doesn't teach us anything. If
Mm.
anything, it can make us even more biased and prejudiced. And we can walk away from lived experience with extremely erroneous subjective understandings. And then, when today, in academia and elsewhere, lived experience and your personal story and your personal narratives count for so much, we are running a huge risk of creating a society that does not even know how to sift through sometimes deeply problematic personal stories, because we've already raised personal story above scientific truth. Okay,
Mm.
particularly when it comes from victims or groups that are considered to be victim groups. So if it's
Yeah.
women or immigrants or children or whatever, the gay people, we have presumed that there is something about their stories that is sacrosanct, not recognizing that those stories could be deeply flawed because the storyteller has not had the objectivity or distance to understand his own story. So, where do we learn? If we don't learn through education and if we don't learn through personal experience,
Mm.
what is what a miserable state our species is in.
Well, that's a we need to go back to that question, but I want to comment on that. What you said before, I was gonna say, um, questioning the lived experience of victims, people that have um, experienced some kind of injustice.
Right.
It reminds me of so many debates in the social sciences about testimonials of people or life stories. You know, people that in the past weren't able to tell their own story because
Right.
someone else told it for them, and so we are in the post modern kind of stage where we acknowledge and we want to give those people a space, and we want to recognize that they you know what they were those stories were previously told by white men or the people in power, and so all of a sudden they have the power of their voice, to use their voice and tell their own story. But it turns out that you cannot question what they
Right.
say, because they have, now they have the power to tell their own stories, and they have been victims or victimized somehow. So this makes them somehow exempt from our questioning. And I found, there's so many debates about this, and there's of course many people that say, they can say whatever they want about themselves
Right.
because it's their life, and you cannot question
You
the
cannot.
life of someone that previously didn't have a voice,
Right.
and now they can do with that power whatever they want and tell their story, the story they want about their lives. So that's one part of the question for you, and the other part, Ashok, I would like to talk about is when we are traumatized by failure, when what you talked about, um, this opens a huge door to talk about whether whether we are crippled for life if we hold on to that trauma. So if we keep going back to that experience of trauma, and this is, that we need to, it needs to be recognized, and this is why we can't be questioned. Again, so we can't be questioned, and um, this this is something I encountered in your classes for the first time. When, for example, we talk about microaggressions, and microaggressions are, I have seen the charts talking about like mosquito bites, and if they bite you, as many times, or too many times, you're going to be completely bothered, and this is what, that basically makes us exempt, or makes us deserve um,
Protection.
protection, or makes us basically protection for being more sensitive.
Right.
So basically, being sensitive is normalized for a group of people that are experiencing these microaggressions. So I think that particularly it goes against our ability to survive. And this is something we talk about in our classes, but it really doesn't help people that experience microaggressions. I experience microaggressions. I'm sure you experience microaggressions, but this is also something I learned in therapy. If I don't get over it, I'm always going to be stuck there. And people are not, I mean, the entire world doesn't have to consider me for these microaggressions. So I have to get over them. It's my responsibility.
Uh, there's just so much here. I think this is the kind of conversation you need to visit my home, and we need to sit through on a Sunday with many, many glasses of beer or coffee or wine or whatever, and talk
Mm-hmm.
through the day. But I want to just make sure that there are a couple of things that we don't leave without clarification.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a difference between trauma that requires attention and healing,
Mm-hmm.
because particularly certain kinds of people, it's regardless of what the background is. Even a person from a very privileged background could, after a miscarriage, be deeply traumatized. So we all carry different levels of trauma. Some people, veterans with PTSD, it's
Mm-hmm.
horrific. So yes, trauma is a very powerful obstacle to any learning or thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that needs healing, that needs treatment. What has happened right now is, for political reasons, certain groups of people have been um, valorized as deserving of public sympathy. They are seen as moral because they have been victimized in the past. I'll give you an example. Now, here I am. I'm brown, dark brown. I'm an immigrant. Um, when in the US or in Europe, when I talk from a scientific perspective, when I try to be very clear about a topic, say on race or gender, people have trouble hearing me, particularly people from the left, liberal, progressive end of the spectrum. They have trouble hearing me because I am speaking according to them, an objective, caricatured white man's logic. I'm speaking that language. But the moment I say, as a brown man, as an immigrant, they all sit up and listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what the hell? I mean, are you saying that as a brown man or an immigrant, I'm not capable of the best thinking that is possible? Why is my subjective story suddenly deserving of people coming and saying, Ashok, I can empathize with you. Oh my God, you have suffered so much. I don't want your sympathy. I want you to understand the reasoning that I'm bringing to this, because that has implications beyond Ashok's life. And for me, this is what education is supposed to do. It's supposed to help us step away from our personal traumatized narratives. One of the ways in which I explain this is, we all have lived experience. Now, if all of us have lived experience, from the villages, from the tribes. None of us needs to go to school. I'm not even talking higher academia. We don't need any formal education because we're learning everything in that context.
Yeah.
There's nothing richer than learning from your mother, from your uncle, from the trees around you, the weeds, the snakes in the grass. You are learning and you're absorbing. There's no doubt about it. But
Mm.
education is more than anything else. It's based on an assumption that your life experience is limited and it's parochial. It's limited to the specific context. If you've grown up in a little village in the Amazon or a little tribe in the Amazon, you could be very well equipped to function there, but you don't understand what's happening in Sao Paulo or in Rio.
Mm.
Similarly, if you've been born in Rio, you don't understand what it is to live in Brussels or what it is to think or understand life for an Eskimo. Now, which means education's primary responsibility is to take us away from our stories, our personal stories. And
Mm.
something has happened politically where where personal stories are being given more and more credence. I'll give you one last example, and then I want to hear from you. And then we, both of us, we need to start taking the questions that are coming our way. When I came to design school, sorry, when I came to graduate school in Boston, I was in a very funny situation. I didn't have a regular undergraduate education. I went to design school, and that was not a degree, it was a diploma, but a 5.5 year diploma. It was a very intensive design education. It was not academic at all. Now, I was coming in for a graduate program without the requisite without the requisite psychology, philosophy, or even literature or statistics background.
Mm.
This was in 96, 97. The university, I'm grateful for what they did. They bent over backwards to give me credit for life experience. I got into my master's without even a decent undergraduate program, liberal arts. So, which means I didn't know anything about math or statistics. I didn't know anything about psychology. I knew nothing of formal philosophy. I knew nothing of educational pedagogy or instruction or anything. And my program was an interdisciplinary program which brought together the schools of philosophy, education, and psychology. It was a phenomenal idea. And they had me that they made exceptions for because of my life stories. The only class where I struggled was psychology, where I still remember Professor Stephen Schwartz wouldn't let me get away with my personal stories. He said, Ashok, you haven't really understood the textbook. You don't understand the primary principles of cognitive psychology. He gave me, I think, a C or something for my first paper. Every other professor, I was able to get away with my reasoning as well as my life experience. I got A's most of the time or A pluses. But Steve Schwartz gave me a C or C minus, and I had to work my butt off to finally get an A from him for the last paper. I got an A, but he was the only one who recognized Ashok wasn't equipped to be in grad school. His life experience, however legitimate it was, did not equate an educational experience. And that is what is missing today. People are able to coast
Mm.
because of their political stance, their moral stance, because they're good people, anti racist, anti sexist, and therefore, at many levels, they are not required to do the really hard work of questioning the foundations, of learning things that are uncomfortable. And as a result, many of the people that I meet today with masters and even PhDs really don't know how to learn. I would say many of them don't even know how to think. They have all the opinions that are considered legitimate at this point in time in
Mm.
their subculture. and that's about it.
Yeah. Ashok, I want to say something just to take like what I'm taking away, because I'm going to be thinking more about what you're saying here, because I haven't really thought through this whole idea of how our experiences are, how our reliance of life experiences on our life experiences and the story that we tell about those experiences can actually work against us. So
Absolutely.
I'm because there's so much. I'm an anthropologist. I was trained in a school where we really want to give people that haven't had a voice to tell their story, and we consider this our evidence. This, we are taking it as is. We are not questioning it, because it's their right to say and to tell their story, to have that power. Yeah.
Right.
But so what the story you told about people being really interested in your culture infused stories and not in what you had to say from a scientific standpoint is very, very interesting and intriguing from that perspective, because it really makes me think how much we are romanticizing.
Right.
We are seeing life stories, especially from people from the global south that are brown, that are women or whatever. Giving we are having this appeal that we are not seeing. They appear sexier, and even if you are talking science from with a scientific language or about scientific concepts, you're not as appealing to them
Right.
as as when you talk about your personal life. So I'm going to be thinking a lot more about that. I did have an additional question, but I know
Can
we are
I?
getting close
Yeah,
to.
we need to take on the questions of the group, but hold on
Mhm.
to that question. If we have time, I'd like to come back to it.
Okay.
So I'm going to take Champaka's question, and there's a Kaumadi. Kaumadi's got a question about social sciences. It may be better if you take that, Pilar. So
Okay.
Champaka asks, is this kind of thinking restricted to academia alone? Isn't it common to any group of people that are pushing a certain agenda? Absolutely, Champaka. The reason why we focus on academia here is because we are talking about education itself. I'm not talking of politics per se. I'm not talking about civic behavior. I'm not talking of anything else. I'm not talking of industry. I'm talking about education, which is one reason why we're looking at academic institutions. And it doesn't even have to be higher institutions of academia. Today, there are people who are terribly worried about elementary school education and the political agendas that are informing some of that. Hitherto, this was common only in, say, madrasas, where Islamist education was infused into the curriculum from get go, or in dictatorial regimes like in communist Soviet Union or in North Korea. The fact that it's happening in the Western world and today in democratic, supposedly democratic environments like in India, where there's a right wing Hindu infiltration into the curriculum, this makes it extraordinarily scary. You also mentioned something else. I just want to go there. Isn't academia a heterogeneous space? It's supposed to be. There have been many, many questions about how diverse academia is, not just in the student population, but also in the faculty. In fact, one of the biggest challenges is that, particularly Western universities, actively discriminate against conservative thinking and conservative academics. Academics. In India, it was before the Modi government came, there was a criticism of elite institutions like JNU that you had to be a neo Marxist if you wanted to survive in a place like that. Today, it's flipped the other way. And if you are a left leaning or liberal thinker and academic, you are not as welcome. In fact, your entire existence could be threatened. So, all academic environment very often tends to veer towards a certain kind of ideology. Pilar, would you take on Kaumadi's question?
Yeah. I think what Kamadi is asking makes me think of statistics. So in statistics, there the qualitative methods in statistics try to identify patterns in as you do your interviews with your participants. You try to identify patterns that are common in all of the interviews and what is different, and then you take all of that and then plot it into a regression model, and that's how you can construct more quantitative, or you could say more objective approach to that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, that's it's not a model that is used commonly in anthropology, which is my field, but there is a method where you can transform the subjective stories into numbers, basically.
Right. And again, I'm not an academic, so Kamadi, I don't want to say too much except this, that in the last 20 odd years, particularly in the social sciences, in literature, in psychology, in social work, there has been a very determined push towards a subjective approach. Now, I do realize that there were other models, objectivist, constructivist, etc., etc. I'm not sure they are as popular today. So I just want to put it out there, but it's worth exploring. And it's also very likely that it varies from university to university. It varies from country to country. I'm quite certain the German approach is very different from the American approach or the Indian one. So Nirmala says, if we want to learn from lived experience, what do you recommend? To see the experiences from different perspectives, or to see each situation as a fresh one, which needs to be examined by itself? So, Nimi, I guess my my minor suggestions would be to constantly remember that there's a disconnect or there's a gap between what happens to me and the way I process it. So if you say something at a very basic level, you say something and I'm offended, there's a difference between what you said, where you're coming from, what your intention is on one hand, and its impact on me. Now, which means that when I'm processing an experience, I have to not only look at what happened to me and the consequences of that. I might have spiraled into a depression for 48 hours, gone on a drinking binge because of what you said to me. But that's part of what has happened. What else has happened here? To begin with, how do you understand that phrase or that language, the vocabulary that you used? What is the context in which you were pushed or motivated to use that? What is our past relationship, and what were you trying to communicate with me? Were you under some kind of pressure? All of this needs to be looked at. So the best way I can say, put this is, never trust your response to an experience. It is totally personal, it's totally subjective, and it is only the tip, the sharp tip of what happened. But there's the rest of the arrow or spear. Perhaps there are flowers at one end of the spear. We don't know that. And our brains are so geared to protecting us from offense and from harm and from threat that we are our worst teachers. So that's the first thing that I would tell you. We don't have to look at everything from a fresh perspective. It's difficult, but we have to remind ourselves of the limitation of our own response and the way we understand responses. Shiva has another question, and this is related to my anecdote of Gundappa Vishwanath. He says, let us recognize a weakness and reflect upon it. But let us say I recognize a weakness and reflect upon it, but I'm unable to learn how to fix it. What happens? Okay, 2 to 3 different things, Shiva. The first one is it's not enough to recognize a weakness and reflect upon it by yourself, because you and I are so close to the tip of that incident. By that I mean to getting out in cricket, to being hurt by a statement, to having failed in running a business. We are too close to that. The only way we can reflect upon and learn from an experience is by bringing in fresh insights. It may require brainstorming with others who know something about this. It may mean deconstructing what has happened from multiple perspectives. Now, if after all that, let's just say Gundappa Vishwanath, who is a phenomenal player, has deep structural problems in his footwork, which prevent him from correcting it. There's nothing the man can do. He has to find ways to avoid that kind of a ball, not try to hit it to the covers, which is what he was trying to do in this particular case. This lethal delivery, every time he saw that, he tried hitting it out of the stadium and he always fell prey to it. So perhaps when you and I discover a situation that is very lethal for us, we find a way to either avoid responding the way we normally respond or avoid it altogether if no amount of tweaking of technique or approach or disposition can help us. Pilar, why don't you take the next one?
Okay, this is a tough one. Champaka asks, aren't individual narratives of injustice critical to assess circumstances where human rights are violated? I'm just gonna say what is running through my mind as you're talking, Ashok, is or what we've discussed in this conversation is that there's really something to getting closer to the truth in any situation, and if someone has been victimized, this is very important. The closer we are to the truth. So what you're saying, Ashok, is that we cannot 100% trust even in the victim's narrative about their own circumstance, because it can be blurred by their emotions and by their trauma. So can we find find a way to get close to the truth, which is, I think, a lot of what the historical methods teach. It's
Right.
How do you get closer to the truth is by combining a bunch of different narratives, not just focusing on the victim or the one who won, but you have to gather from a lot of different people and the witnesses, and then you can get closer. But you can never actually find out what the truth was about an incident. It's very difficult to do, but we cannot just rely on the victims' narratives.
Absolutely. And I don't think, Champaka and the others, my point is not at all to diminish or dismiss personal stories or subjectivity. Those are, and Pilar put it very well, if you are trying to understand what really happened or what really exists, what reality is, you have to try and use every sense that you have. You have to use as wide a series of sources in order to come closer to the truth. And she put it very well, come closer to the truth. The problem is that in the last 20 to 30 years, Western society, particularly, and liberal societies everywhere, have privileged the stories of victims as a very understandable in an understandable effort to finally bring them to the surface, in the hope that in doing so you can establish justice. for historically marginalized groups. The intention was good. The problem is in valorizing these narratives. The problem is in considering them sacrosanct. At the moment you do that, you are weighing in not on the truth anymore. You're not even weighing in on justice. You are weighing in on giving credence to a certain category of people because they are the privileged in that context. The privileged are the women. The privileged are the gays. The privileged are the trans. The privileged are the immigrants. This is, I mean, because of my interest in history, when I take a step back from the 2020s and I look at this phenomenon, I think, oh my God, no time in human history have minorities had it so good. Can you imagine any society on the planet over 10,000 years that gave this kind of credence to dissenters, to minorities, to people who are outside the mainstream? No. It is only because of starting from the age of enlightenment a couple of 100 years ago, and most definitely after World War II and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then very specifically after the civil rights movements of the 1960s. And we have recognized the importance, much overdue in human historical terms. We have recognized the importance of giving voice to people who were not at the table, people who were on the margins. But we have, in the process, confused truth seeking with morality. The fact that I am a minority should not mean my voice is in any way more important than that of a majority or a dominant person. This requires something that the educational system has neglected to do, which is, and Pilar talked of critical thinking. You cannot have, and because of the work I do in pluralism and diversity, I have come to the uncomfortable realization that any society that gives up on science as an approach, that gives up on truth seeking, that gives up on making judicious, discerning judgments about true or false, or what's closest to truth and what's not as close to truth, is bound to be a society where minorities or weaker groups are completely obliterated. The only reason why someone like me or someone like Pilar or like many of you have some influence today, have a voice, is because for the past 100 odd years or 150 years, and definitely after World War II, we created institutions that were based on reason. Now the progressive left is trying to rework those institutions so that reason is not the one that is privileged, but personal stories and subjectivity and perceived injustices are given greater weightage than evidence, data, reasoning. The only ones who will suffer from this are the weak, because the weak need this way more than the strong. Because, and I'll stop with this, the strong have always had might. The law of the jungle has been the law of every human society, with certain layers of rule of law or judicial systems or constitutions that we have woven it. And if we move away from reason, really ruthless reasoning, frankly, we are in trouble.
Ashok, I want to add something to what you just said, and it's really, I think we need to acknowledge that a lot of these, not only, like you said, benefit the people that are meant to benefit the people that are oppressed or victimized, but there are political agendas. So they benefit the people that have a political agenda, and in a lot of cases, these instruments that have been we have struggled for many years to gain the instruments that we have today in the law to protect us have been really like they're weaponized. In many cases, they're misused and they're co-opted by people that have a political agenda that see a political gain. So not all the time are the victims, benefiting from it, but we are in a time where this can be misused. And I'm not
Absolutely.
saying it's in all cases, but in many cases this happens. And
Right.
yeah, we need to acknowledge that too.
Absolutely. And Quanta has a question. Is it possible that we only modify, evolve, evaluate, and morph our knowledge, not necessarily unlearn what is already embedded in our mind? Quanta, that's a great point. Unlearn does not mean completely remove. Unlearn means sometimes things are too rigid. We have established the truth about something in our minds. It becomes almost dogmatic. And most of us walk around with a fair amount of certainty. There are many things about which I'm very certain, and I walk around living my life with that level of certainty. When I encounter a new thought which challenges or questions one aspect, one thing that I hold to be true, unlearning means loosening the edges, making it fuzzier so that I can understand and incorporate and, as you say, absorb some of this new learning into my old rigid learning. That is a very difficult thing. And here's a very interesting thing. What I know is not just a question of facts. What I know creates the kind of person I am, and it is the basis for my identity. In other words, if you question what I know, you're not merely questioning something technical. You're not asking me to challenge a data point. You are suggesting that Ashok doesn't understand the world well enough. He's been walking around with a misconception. And when you suggest that, or when I read that into what you're saying, I can no longer be certain about who I am, because my identity itself is built on all these things that have come together. So, yes, unlearning doesn't mean completely changing, but it does mean making my understanding less rigid so that I can learn, I can evolve, I can morph. Um, I'm going to stop there. There are so many other thoughts that come to my mind. So, Pilar, you at one point you had a question for me. Is that a quick question that you want to?
Yes, I,
Yeah.
I, I had this question. I prepared some questions for you, and I always wanted to ask you this question. Um, okay, let me read it. I have it written down.
Oh my God!
Um,
Now I'm getting nervous.
how do you deal with the temptation of being liked or likable? It's much more difficult to reject being liked in order to think independently and thus remain open to learning. We crave praising and perhaps we even need it, but it could be harmful for us. Can you say more about this from your personal life experience?
I realized at one point, not too long ago, that I craved people liking me.
Mm-hmm.
I craved being loved. I craved being belonging to groups. But I realized that for some strange reasons, probably because I'm a difficult person, regardless of whatever I wanted from the people around me, I kept butting heads with them. I never saw things the way others saw it. And I think, in the tussle between wanting to be liked and wanting to maintain my integrity, wanting to maintain my integrity always won out. This meant that, particularly around 7 to 8 years ago, I lost interest in making efforts to be liked. I realized it was a losing game.
Hmm.
I was traumatized if I offended someone and my ideas offended someone and they stopped talking to me. They would go around telling all kinds of tales. They would exaggerate my flaws. And I started, it mattered too much to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then that coincided with my sense of absolute despair and urgency about the state of democracy and the world. So, about 7 to 8 years ago, I realized Ashok is not important anymore. He is irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether people like me or not. It doesn't matter if I'm successful or not. It doesn't matter if people think I'm a jerk. I have a responsibility to speak the, I won't even call it my truth, to articulate what I consider to be a grave danger coming upon us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only responsibility I have. And if people shut me out, alienate me from their groups, that's I have no control over it. I
Mm-hmm.
wish that were not the case. People who know me to be an extraordinary extrovert. I love people. I love hanging out with people. I love cooking and feeding people. But I have less and less people wanting to come home for dinner. It hurts me. But it's kind of irrelevant after a point.
And Ashok, can you tell us what did it do to your learning when you had this shift? How
Mm,
did your learning change?
I am totally liberated because I don't have to worry about anyone being upset about any new thought I have. Because even my students, I tell my students all the time, I don't care if you agree with me. I don't care if you like me or come back to my courses after this. But if you're going to disagree, and I hope you do, you will use robust reasoning to do so. Do not tell me that you disagree and walk away. Do not tell me that you agree with most of what I think and walk away. Do not, do not tell me you are hurt by what I say. It has no more meaning for me unless you can speak further. Because otherwise, frankly, we create the kind of world that will only be inherited by the Trumps and the Modis and others. We are inviting the original anti-science, anti-truth people, the right wing, the
Mm-hmm.
orthodox, the fanatics, the fundamentalists. They are the original cancel culture. And we are inviting them with our own modeling of this. I can't think of anything more devastating that anyone who is interested in human rights, equality, justice, or liberal values can do. So right now, I don't give a damn. Cancel me. I'm a failure financially. I'm a failure in terms of business. What more are you going to do?
Ashok, what comes to mind is some people don't have the luxury to not be liked. Like some people really need to be liked in order to keep their job, in order
Right.
to. So that's, I mean, it really begs the question: can learning happen? Because even in liberal societies, at where your workplace, in your family, in the family, like they grab like how to balance this need to be liked in order to belong to a community, in order to have economic sustenance or even participate politically, and then also do have that sense of freedom in order to explore new things. In my case, not caring what other people think of me, or caring less and less, because I still have a lot of work to do and learning to do. But it set me free to explore projects that I wouldn't have if I had to report to a boss, or if I had to be liked somehow. So can you say something about that? Maybe we can wrap up with that.
Yeah. As a last thought, I just want to say, to live in any society, you have to be accepted by the people in that society.
Mm-hmm.
This is true, and I respect that. I am not a fan of the raving, raging revolutionary or rebel. I'm not. I do believe that we live in a moment of crisis where it's very important to be forthright about what, at least for me, what I'm talking about. Having said that, the how do you balance the need to belong, the need to
Mhm.
cooperate and collaborate with people, with the need to maintain your intellectual and creative integrity?
Mhm.
That's a huge topic, and it's something that in our courses we are wrestling with. And I do believe there is a very good balance that can be achieved. And this is where many of the tools and skills that we who are schooled in conflict resolution methodologies, etc., we can bring to bear.
Mhm.
So it's, as I said, maybe that is something you and I can explore the next time we invite you to a studio conversation, Pilar.
Okay.
So, thank you very much. And I want to also remind everyone Pilar is a PhD and a cultural anthropologist. She's an award winning filmmaker on food and culture. And I also want to use this opportunity to remind those of you who are here that if you attend our programs like this, if you support our programs, we can continue to do more. We are not sexy. We are not high excitement. We don't provide drama, but we are really trying to have sincere, intelligent, and warm conversations. We are really trying to alert people to the dangers that our society faces. If you are in doubt about these dangers, please take a look at my own country, India, and what COVID has done to India. It's not just the pandemic, it's the destruction of our institutions over the past 20 to 30 years, most recently through the actions and neglect of our right wing government, which came in 2014. So, really, all we can do right now is learn to think independently and learn to engage with each other with generosity but rigor. So, thank you very much. Um, I believe there are some flyers that are going to come up right now that I should share with you. I'm just going to give it a second. I'm sure Shri in the background is bringing it up. Okay, so we are doing this really interesting program called Zeitgeist Zero. This happens on two days of the month, the second and third, if I'm not mistaken, Wednesdays of the month. And this is an interesting format because we will have for each month a topic. The one that's coming up in July is wokeness, the idea of woke. What is it? And it'll happen on the 21st, on the 14th, and then for a whole week, we will we will be using a platform where we ask ourselves really interesting questions for reflecting and thinking about this before we come on the 21st to wrap everything up. So, again, do try to attend Zeitgeist Zero. We also have our next culture and democracy course starting on July 19th. It is our flagship course. We are going to be doing our 10th one. We're very excited. It will completely change the way in which you look at everything that has to do with society, politics, human rights, community. All of these will be questioned, and hopefully, you will come out of it with a very fresh understanding of all these. Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate your being here. And if you're going to tune in, or rather view us on YouTube, we have our own Metaculture channel. I would love to get your responses to this. Please write to me there is a email here, which is the Metaculture email. That's Metaculture Studio, one word, at gmail.com. Love your thoughts on this, and hope I do hope you will come by and join us the next time around. So thank you very much, everyone. Follow us on social media and stay safe.